Okay, our guest speaker for the afternoon is our own Edward Kieswetter, Professor Kieswetter. And I don't want to say much except maybe capturing it in a few words, is that Edward has indeed worked extensively in different workplace contexts, be it private, be it social, be it public. And that in those contexts, he has played different roles, and in all of those, he ended up taking up a prominent, well-defined, and well-articulated role. So, in that sense, we want, and we could believe, that there should be, Edward, a multiple of stories emerging from such layered and rich life engagement. So we are looking forward today to listen to 4 stories, if I understand it correct, which Edward, coming from that rich engagement, that he wants to share with us. And in that sense, feeding our notion of managerial leadership, practice and principles and idea for a better society. So welcome.
Thank you. Now it's your turn, Peter, to get back at me. So, the reason I tell stories to start off with is because I haven't worked out a methodology or a robust theoretical framework that's part of the next project. So I'm a normative leader. I'm a reflective practitioner. I think that it's an inordinate privilege that we have the faculty to learn. And so I approach all my work with not only the intent of doing the work, but also reflecting ahead, during, and after the work, so that I come out with personal growth and development, and not just have the work as an edifice of the time and effort, but also come out as a richer person. My disclaimer is the thing I told my sons normally, that the only reason I'm able to teach you anything in life is because of the many mistakes I've made. So I make the same disclaimer today. So I decided, I don't know if there's anyone from Eskom here today. If there are, then you may not recognize the Eskom that I talk about, because I was there when Rock of Ages was still a pebble. As a young 33, 34-year-old power plant manager of Mashla Power Station many years ago. So you're Akon? Zanele. Ninja. So I'm going to tell you 4 stories that I've chosen because there are 3 insights that I think is useful, has been useful for me as a managerial leader, and these stories help me crystallize them as insights. The first insight is trust must be commanded, not demanded. The second insight is to be trusted, one has to reciprocate trust. Very often we expect people to trust us, but we remain suspicious of them. We don't trust them. And the third insight is that taking the effort to create shared meaning gives people purpose to work that otherwise can seem meaningless and senseless. And so I've chosen to share with you 3 stories about my time as a power plant manager, and specifically stories that relate to a category of workers in Eskom that we have the audacity to call unskilled workers. And we call them unskilled workers because they were generally 50 plus year old African men who had been deprived of the basic communication skills to communicate in English or actually Afrikaans, many of them because of where they grew up. And so they were Zulu-speaking men, and we call them unskilled. Okay? But as it turned out, they had wonderful skills that we were just not aware of. So I've chosen deliberately to focus on that constituency and tell my 4 stories about them. through those stories, I became a much more, a better leader, but also as a human being, a much more blessed, enriched human being. So the first story happened in about the first week of November 1994. I'd just been announced as the new power plant manager of Matla Power Station. We still were in the early, fragile days of our new democracy. There was still a lot of looking out. Many people were still wondering what they're going to do with all their bully beef and their candles. And they started thinking about, well, this may not be so bad. I'm not sure we still think that in 2016, but in 1994 we were optimistic, we were hopeful. And so I walked into my office one morning at 7 o'clock, and the head of security who was at the gate told me and said, "Meneer Akahiyaka." For those of you who know what that means. And I said, "What's happening?" And he said, "There's a crowd of our staff gathering outside. They're chanting, they're singing, they are bearing placards. Must I let them in?" I said, "Well, they work here, so let them in." And then he promptly let them in and rushed off to my office. As I looked out my window, I saw the chanting and the marching coming towards the office. And I remember I'm a 34-year-old, inexperienced manager of this big Meccano set. Haven't even worked out where the on and off switch is. And here I face this army of African men in blue overalls, toy-toying and chanting. And for those of you who've seen it know that it's warlike. It's fear-instilling. I looked out of the window and I just heard Koos saying to me, "Meneer, moenie bekommerd wees nie, ons gaan jou beskerm. Vandag gaan ons jou beskerm." So I said, "But I must go down and I must go and meet them." And he said to me, "Nee meneer, you can't go down. You can't go and meet them because it's dangerous. The union members are going to hurt you." I said, "In Koos, for a moment, let's not think of them as union members. They are our employees. And I am their manager. So I'm going to meet them." And finally, they were standing in front of the administration block, and I went down to thinking I'm going to speak to them. As I came out there, Aram Kwanza, who was my head of HR, stood there, and I just stood for what must have seemed like an eternity, probably 2-3 minutes, and I said nothing. I just absorbed the noise, the chanting, the mood, the emotions, the outbursts, the placards. And finally, I asked Aaron to ask them to give me a moment to say something. And I didn't say much. I said to them, "I see, I hear, and I feel your anger, your dissatisfaction, to problems that I don't even understand. But I want to give you the commitment that I will do everything in my power. I will put in every effort to ensure that I understand every single one of your concerns. But I cannot solve it here. I need time, and I need to speak to a smaller group of leaders first." The chanting stopped. They stood still and they listened. And I said, "Can I ask you to go back to your workstations, and later during the course of the morning, I will reconvene a meeting for us." I took the management team, and they all went, very orderly, very quietly, their placards down, and they went to work. But now I knew that we had to do something. So I called the union leadership, led by Aram Mahlangu, as opposed to Aram Kwanza. And we went into the boardroom with the managers, and I just listened. We spent about probably 2 hours or so in the boardroom, and I just listened. I said, "Go through all of your grievances." And they took me through a list of about 15 grievances, and obviously very colorful, very detailed, very emotional, and I just absorbed. And at the end of it, I replied and I said, "I've spent almost 2.5 hours listening to you. and I still don't understand everything. So why don't we go and meet all the staff and give them the opportunity to speak to me directly and tell me about their concerns, their grievances, what they're angry about. And I give you a few simple commitments. One, I will take as much time as I need to understand every single issue. Two, I will always tell you what I honestly believe to be true, even though you may not always like my answers, but you can always believe them. I will never lie to you. And three, I will work as hard as it needs to be worked at to make sure we can make life better for all of our employees. And we left at 11:30 that morning. We reconvened. I walked into the single quarters community hall, and on another day I'll tell you about single quarters dormitories and how dehumanizing that is for people who separated from their families and live in real conditions that no one should ever live in. But that's another story. Walked into a room of about 800 chanting and very animated, mostly general workers. And I walked up to the stage, and finally they settled down, and this time Aaron Moshlangu did the translation for me. And again, I listened for about 2.5, 3 hours. Here and there asked for them to just clarify. And finally I thought I have a decent enough, I share with you an anecdote. One of the things they asked me was to say, we want, for those of us who have taken no sick leave, we want a prize at the end of the year. What are you going to give us? I stood there and I said nothing. And they all looked at me. I said, why not? I said, because the prize of not taking sick leave is good health. That's the prize of not taking sick leave. We don't need any other reward. And they all just sat quiet. I didn't solve many problems, but I closed giving exactly the same commitment, told them that this is what we're going to do. I can't do it alone. I need their leadership. I need them. And we'll talk as long and as much as we can. And I left the hall about 3 hours later to a standing ovation. And having laid the foundation of a very rich relationship. The first thing I went out, I phoned, get my secretary to say, find me a Zulu teacher. Okay? And I immediately started to learn Zulu. Because I realized that one of the ways I can earn trust, Nelson Mandela said, if you speak to a man in a language he understands, you speak to his mind. But if you speak to a man in his mother tongue, you speak to his heart. And I wanted to touch their hearts. I wanted them to see me not behind the power station manager title, but to see me as just a human being. Frail, not perfect, not all-knowing, but committed to help work with them. And so now, ngiyakhuluma isiZulu kancane kancane, ngizama. And I would walk into the lifts, and I was able to say, how are you? Over time I learned many of their names, and I'm able to ask them, how are things at home? What are you doing? Where are you going to? Where do you work? How are your kids? And it wasn't, I could not conduct a sermon in Zulu, but I could enough to engage at just the basic human level. And one of the most wonderful things that I could have done. And so for me, the insight out of that story, which I can elaborate more, but I want to tell you more stories, is that you have to go the extra mile. You cannot, because of your legal, rational authority, expect that people must trust you, let alone demand that they must trust you. And trust has to be earned every day. Trust isn't a shelf item that once you've earned it, you put it on the shelf and you have it. You have to earn it every day. And that I learned within my first week as a power plant manager. And I learned it from people that we called unskilled, A-band workers. I don't know if we still use that term. Yes, exactly. The second story is that to be trusted, you have to trust. So within the first year, I was ambitious, Peter. I wanted to put a ding in the universe as a young power plant manager. So we went around the world to find out how are the best power stations run. And we came up with this 97-3 vision that is now sadly 80-10, whatever, 20. One day I was talked about 97-3. And the management team, we worked on a very radical model for how we could run power plant. You'll find it somewhere in the records of Eskom, referred to as the Matla Challenge. And one of it implied that we would reorganize staff and break up the silo functions of operations, maintenance, and engineering, at least at the production level, at the short-term day-to-day operations management, and create smaller production teams with very demarcated production unit areas. So I created 6 production units for the 6 generating units, and we created 3 support for coal plant, ash plant, and just the general plant. And so we had to reintroduce that. But those years, restructuring was a swear word, because trade unions distrusted any form of restructuring, and especially if it meant that we would break up big teams of 100 or 120 people into smaller teams of 10. They looked through you and said, you want to make us smaller teams so that you can manipulate us, so that you can, the great imperial divide et imperi, divide and rule. And we had to convince them that that wasn't in fact the case. There was a strong business case. But we, as managers, communicate rationally. We communicate logic. And when people resist something, no amount of logic can convince or persuade you. Because again, you have to move from the heart, from the brain and the mind to the heart. And we had to find a way to do that. So there we were, really, really tearing then I had more hair. Trust me, I'll show you the photographs. I had more hair then, but I wanted to pull the hair out. Sorry, that's for my back. This is... and engaging, eventually, and often you just pray for these moments of inspiration. And we had run out of every logical explanation. And then I said to them, I tell you what, this is what we need. We need 8 people in this team, 10 people in that team, 12 in that team. And I went to the 9 teams and I said, this is the number of people we need in each team. Why don't I leave this with you and you work it out amongst yourself, who wants to go where? And they looked at me, my managers looked at me, and said, this is crazy. This thing is going to backfire badly on you. And I said, no, I actually trust them. Some of these people are leaders in their community. One served on the Tebelushle town council. He was a councillor. They had, in the traditional communities, leadership roles. Many of them were better fathers than what I was. I listened to their stories about how they managed on their meager salary to send their kids to university, and then I hear the artists and the engineers, saying, I can't afford to send my kid to university. So obviously they were good leaders, but in their context. And I left them. We walked to the main block, and the manager said, you've lost. Today you've lost. And I gave them a week, or it was Thursday, I gave them until the following Wednesday. The Monday morning, a miracle. Just after 7 o'clock, I got a phone call from Ravi Moodley, the production unit manager of Unit 4. And he said to me, Edward, I arrived here this morning at my office, and there were about 10 people here with overalls, hard hats, boots, some of them even lockers, and said, we now work for you. Where do you want us to be? Where do you want us to work? What do you want us to do? And later during the course of the morning, more phone calls came in. And they'd reorganized themselves completely on their own, flawlessly, faultlessly, better than we could ever have done. And we went on. But the lesson and the insight there was that I needed to trust. I needed to reciprocate the trust that I expected. And I promise you, they didn't disappoint me. So that's the second insight. Trust must be reciprocated if you want to be trusted. The third insight comes from meaning and purpose, and I'm going to share with you two quick stories, and then you can ask me whatever you want to ask. So, I want to stand up and I share this with you. So, imagine a day in the life of a general worker on a power plant, a coal-fired power plant. When they walk in on a typical day, during the night, there had been an ash or a coal spillage. And on their, what is nuchtermaag in English? Is there such a
Sober tummies.
on your sober tummy, on your breakfast tummy. Nuchtermaag. I also, I get that. On your empty tummy.
Oh, your empty tummy.
Sorry, Afrikaans is my mother tongue. I know many of you don't believe me. But on your nuchtermaag, you get there, and the first thing you have to do is clean up this mess. And so very dutifully, the power station cleaner in the coal plant would come in, put on his overalls, take a shovel, and go with brooms, shovels, hard hats, hoses, wheelbarrows. Their day would start. And they would breathe in the dust. They would be splattered with the ash water. It's a messy job, it's a dirty job, it's a thankless job. That's their job. And after about 4.5 hours, the place would be pristine. You could eat off the cement floor. Just the silver lining of water, film of water. And then they would go and have their lunch break. During the lunch break, there would be another ash spillage or another coal spillage. And they would come back from lunch, and what they faced at 7 o'clock this morning, they would face all over again. Now, that doesn't strike you as being soul destroying. Can you imagine? Just put yourself in their shoes for a moment and think you've just completed a piece of work that really took everything out of you. And you come back an hour later and there's no evidence of that work. And this bothered me. And I wrestled with this and I said, I cannot change their work. So let me change the meaning of their work. And I would call them into a room and we'd sit on the floor. And I would just talk to them. And I would bring a shovel. And I would take the shovel and I would say to them, today I want to tell you how important your work is. I want to tell you that without you, we cannot run this power plant. If you didn't come to work, we would have to stop this power plant because of the work you do. And I said, the next time you pick up a shovel, and I took the shovel, and I said, the next time you pick the shovel, and you put another shovel of coal from the ground back onto the conveyor belt, I want you to see at the other end of this shovel is an old lady in Orange Farm on a cold winter's night enjoying a hot cup of soup because of the electricity that was provided because of this shovel of coal that you've just put back on the conveyor belt. I want you to see at the other end, and I will do it again, the shovel, I want you to see a little boy in Diepsloot, sitting late at night with his school books at an electric globe, at a lamp, studying and dreaming about one day becoming a teacher or a doctor. It's possible because you've taken this shovel of coal and threw it back. And I will do it a third time, and I will say to them, I want you to see at the end of the shovel a father on his last in Baragwanath Hospital, on his deathbed, kept alive by equipment, life support equipment, and able to see his children one more time and tell them, I love you. And I would look at those men sitting there, and I would see their eyes light up. Here and there I would see a tear fall, and a nod, and an acknowledgement, not of the work that they do, because that was a soul-destroying work, but the difference their work made, the impact that their work had. And that is when I learned that one of the tasks, the indispensable task of leaders, is to help create meaning. Help people understand not the work that they do, but the difference that their work makes, the impact that their work does. I didn't refer to it then, only many years later I referred that to giving a higher purpose to the work that you do. But that was my first experience of how we can transform people's lives by transforming their sense of the meaning of their work. We continued this because one of the engagement principles that we apply in leadership, and there are 5 engagement principles that we use, but one of the engagement principles is never ask people to do something and not tell them what winning looks like. What does success mean? People must know whether they are winning or not. Not at the end of the year when they don't get a salary increase, or when they get fired because you completely are disenchanted with them, but by 10 o'clock that first morning, and certainly by the end of the day and by the end of the week, they must know whether they have won or not. Because that then closes the sense of impact, not meaning. And so we invented an event. And this event took place once every quarter. And we would take up a field, an empty field on the power plant. And this was the task that we gave everyone. You must present the quarterly results of your production unit. You must present it. But here are the rules. 1, the manager may not present it. The team must present it. 2, you may not use a PowerPoint presentation. You can use flip charts if you want to. But no PowerPoint presentation. You can rap it. You can sing it. You can dance it. You can act it. And that was the brief. I tell you the stories that came out, and I'll share with you one particular story from the coal plant general workers. We had taught them that when we get coal from the mine, we buy it in rand per kiloton of coal. But in that kiloton of coal was stone, iron, tool bits and pieces. And so we were paying rand per ton of coal plus junk. And we had to take the junk out, and so that every ton of coal that actually went into the mills had useful energy to convert into steam. And also, if we didn't remove those big head irons and stone and tool pieces that was in the coal, often it would break the mill equipment, and the mill would break down, the unit would have to come down, and we would lose production time. And so we explained to them why it was important for them to convert rand per kiloton of coal into rand per kilojoule of coal. In other words, a mass of coal to an energy mix. And this is one of those occasions that again brought tears to our eyes. When this team explained to me, this was the scene, imagine this scene. They were on the stage, a group of about 10 of them. And the first one held a placard. And on the placard was a pile of coal drawn, and at the above was rand per kiloton. And he stood there, speechless. And in front of him there was a pile of coal. and a bucket. And then a few of them stood like this and formed a conveyor belt. And one of them picked up a little bit of coal, held it in front of a rand per kiloton, and moved it along on the conveyor belt, and along the way took out some stones and stuff. And at the end of the thing, there was another speechless guy standing there with a placard, rand per kilojoule. And he then threw it into the mill. And we had taught them that every rand per kiloton of coal, we must make sure that we get a rand per kilojoule of coal into the mills. Then that produces a rand per kilogram of steam, and ultimately rand per kilowatt of electricity. Okay? And so you remember Eskom's vision was we will be the highest cost producer in the world in the late 90s. That was the vision set by Dr. John Moreau. And we had to then connect that to the general world so they can understand how the work that they do contributed to the final rand per kilowatt of energy. And their contribution was to convert a rand of kiloton of coal into a kilojoule of coal. And to just see that and how they got it and how they communicated it. Again, just teaches you the insight that when you empower people, when you help them understand the meaning of their work, you give them purpose. When you help them to know what winning means, you make their life meaningful. And for me, those were some of the wonderful lessons that I've learned as a leader, just from that community that I was privileged to engage with at Eskom. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks very much, Edward, for the way you related those lessons and what came out of it. 2016, we have more of a knowledge worker. Some of them are virtual, not physically in a production space, somewhere in cyberspace, but they produce fantastic work. Just wondering how one will inspire this new generation of workers for a new economy with new challenges to be able to translate what they do and give it meaning that has got to have papers like the one that you translated. What would you have views as to how that can happen?
Fortunately, I have the experience of my recent role as the Group Chief Executive of Alexander Forbes. And you'll know we employ bright people, actuaries, risk investment specialists, people who are really, really very bright, and we made no bones about it. We were snobs about hiring the best people. But I remember my town hall meeting, the first day that I met all the staff. It was on the 1st of April 2010. One of the first slides was, today I want to talk not about the work that we do, but I want to talk about the impact of the work that we do, and introduce the notion of a higher purpose orientation, which I won't expand too much now. But very similarly, introduce the notion that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And my own personal experience is that when I get onto the plane, I never ask to see the certificate of competence of the pilot. I don't know who sits in that cabin, whether it's male, female, black, white, yellow, short, tall, rich, poor. I have no clue of who sits there. But I take for granted that whoever is there, my experience is created by the gentleman or lady who serves me my cup of tea. Or when I step onto the plane, says, "Hello, Mr. Kieswetter, it is so nice to see you again." This morning I stepped off the plane at OR Tambo, and then you have to show your ticket and your passport as you come out. And as I come, the ladies laughed, and said, "Here's Professor Kieswetter again. We don't need to see his documents." And I walked through. It's nice when people know you, right? And for me, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think whatever the work is, so the same conversation that we had with coal station workers in 1994, today we have with actuaries, with investment specialists. So for example, a conversation about producing a proposal. You phone Alexander Forbes, you say, "I need my car insured." Okay? Or you phone and you say, "I need a benefit statement because, I want to see how much pension I have." And so the story we tell is to say, at 4:30 in the afternoon, when you are getting ready to pack up, and you know that the train is waiting or is going to be there any minute, just before you take that piece of paper, and let's say that piece of paper is a benefit statement, just before you take that piece of paper and toss it there and say that can wait until tomorrow, I want you to see that at the other end of that piece of paper is an anxious father who has worked for 35 years and who wants to know whether he can retire and whether he will be able to provide for his family. You have in your hands the anxiety, the concern, and the wishes of that father. Or he's a young 22-year-old first-time worker who has just bought their first car, can't wait to go home and proudly show their mom, their dad, or their friends their first red Uno or Polo. And you have in your hands their joy or their sadness when you say they can wait till tomorrow. And so when we help people understand the impact of the work that they have, we serve a higher purpose. And that's the difference that you can make whether you're a knowledge worker or working on a physical plant.
Edward, can I ask you a question?
Of course.
With permission, what inspired you in those things?
What inspired me?
What inspired you? Because obviously you had a level of wisdom at that point already. So what really inspired you as a
not Ron, Rian. I can't give you a textbook answer for that. What I can tell you is that, firstly, I had the blessing of two wonderful parents who taught me my first two lessons in life. My father was a slave driver, okay? And from him I learned the ethic of hard work. My mother was a simple seamstress, but from her I learned that I'm here to be a blessing. And those lessons guided me throughout my life. But I also knew that you can only give what you have. And therefore part of becoming more, you look at my CV, it's got too many degrees for one person, right? But it was one way of investing in myself and being more in order to give more. I don't know if you know the Jabez prayer. It's an Old Testament story about a man who, in simple terms, said, God, please give me more so that I can be more. I can be a blessing. And that's been my guiding philosophy throughout my life. I don't think it was inspiration. I think it was the blessing of my upbringing.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Just remind me your name. At this age, even my spectacles doesn't allow me to see that. Hello, Raymond.
Yeah. As a managerial leader with an extensive experience both in the public and private sector, right? With the current situation that is going around, with our universities, right, with the fees of fall, let's say you are put on the helm to manage all universities. How would you tackle this issue? And then would you think employers have faith in each and every student, 2016 students, who want to go into the workplace? Let's say you have a look at students' transcript, and then you say, the students from fees, and then you was busy toying and banning infrastructure. Would you employ such
Would I employ such students? Well, I mean, again, I don't have a glib answer for you, but the way I often think about any situation is, there's a word that says, you first have to walk a mile in someone's shoes before you judge them. And the way one often has to think through this problem is to ask, what if it were me? What would I expect you to do if it were me? And firstly, I would expect you not to judge me harshly. I would expect you to understand why I am where I am. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Not necessarily to agree with it. Not necessarily to be glib about an alternative, but just to understand. Seeking to understand is an important part of solving any dilemma, any problem. And the best way to understand something is to put yourself, to immerse yourself in that situation. If I was an administrator or the vice chancellor, I would say, what if that were my children? How would I react if it were my children? And then why should I react differently because it's not my children? So I can't give you a glib blueprint, but I can tell you that that's how I would propose we think through it, as if it were our children, as if it were us. And be clear about where we stand. Because, often when being politically correct has no virtue, okay? If you're not clear about where you stand, you're on dangerous grounds. You're on a marshy, slippery slope. Because if you don't stand for anything, you fall for everything. And you don't have to agree with me, Raymond, but you have to be clear where I stand on something. And if I disagree with you, I will find a kind and dignified way to say that to you, but you will know where I stand on something.
I would like to ask a question, Kevin. Why do you think would Edward say is a normative leader?
Sorry?
Why would Edward say he's a normative leader?
Normative?
Yeah. What does it say to you?
Not an abnormative leader.
Someone who works on the basis of the norm.
And is that a fact, Edward? So maybe he's not a normative leader. Maybe he doesn't need to pronounce it.
Yeah, maybe I'm just...
Sorry.
Maybe I'm just...
Because a normative leader would imply that he's got some algorithm that backs that up, which means that there will be some people who is outside his realm of being.
Yeah.
Whilst if you talk, you don't speak that.
Yeah.
I'll never use the word again. Labels are terrible.
But you use the label.
I apologize.
Edward, thank you very much. There's a gift for the speaker, which ideally must be solved. Oh, sorry, was there not another question?
Yeah.
Well, then ask it, brother.
I've got that last
He's facing you with his back, that's why I didn't see you.
That demonstrates the idea.
Just last one for me, I guess. From my perspective, Americans have to choose between a hard place and a rock. How will you inspire that leader once they are elected to almost have the rest of the world see them as the leader that is taking a rightful place amongst leaders in the world, between the hard place and the rock, if you were to just give that leader counsel?
One is uncounselable, and the other one is rational about counseling. So I would have a different message for either of them. To the one from the Red Party, I would say that no one of us can do the work that all of us must join to do. And that no matter how confident you are that you can do it, you will fail if you think that only you can do it. To the other one, I would say that people don't expect us to be perfect, but they expect us to be authentic.
That's quite powerful.
I don't know if it's the right answer, by the way, or if it's normative.
This is a gift, but as you know, has he solved this problem before?
Possibly.
But you have to solve this problem, and ideally, I would like you today to solve it in the presence of us all.
You want to embarrass me now in front of Peter? The engineer, project manager,
I
guru.
want you to be playful and think Da Vinci
Okay.
in solving this problem.
So do I have to first get it out of the box?
Yes, just as you wish. Well, we give him the let's see what he does with it.
Sounds interesting because now everybody says this. The gift, you probably know that Alpha, however, solved.
How?
Watch where you put your fingers. It might be a mousetrap.
Well, my fingers
Yeah, they
would not ever believe that there are mice.
You may not have to solve it here because if you do, there are some other people here who may come to this at the spotlight as you are sitting down sometime in the kitchen. So they are going to steal the trick from you. No.
So you
There will be
say,
an expose.
so you actually are saying that it is in our collective interest that I don't solve it publicly. I go with that. I think that's
So Edward, when you solve it, you can send us a little clip.
now I'm going to solve it now, despite the wisdom.
This is not play. Yeah.
Wow. So can I think aloud?
Yes.
Because this is how I would approach it. Before I must solve it, I must first pose it, isn't it, Peter? So I must first ask, what is it that I must solve?
Yeah.
I suspect you
Because
have
on the
to
face of it-
remove
On the face
cross
of it,
from the square.
this
So the
must come
problem
out.
you
The
need to
square from
solve.
the-
There's
from
a
the cross.
question. There is a question. You need to dismantle it without breaking it. You have to take it apart.
Do we have super glue? Okay, so let me think aloud around this problem. Okay, because these problems are one of the things we learn in thinking science is that you have to go beyond the obvious. Now,
That's it.
the obvious is that this cannot come out because it is entirely trapped within this cross, right? So the answer has to be in the fact that I can do nothing to this. I have to dismantle the cross.
Because maybe you don't need to do anything with it. With this.
Yeah. No, I don't want to do anything with that. That's not part of my problem.
I can
And
bombard you with somebody who solved it
no.
300 years ago.
No. So now this cross was once not a cross. It was once two pieces of wood. Right? So when it was two pieces of wood, someone made it into one piece of wood. And so the question I'm asking myself is, how did they do that? Because if I know how they did it, then I can undo it. Okay?
I like that.
And I'm now going to look for whatever evidence I can see. So it doesn't pull out this way. So obviously, there's something that's holding it, right?
Maybe super.
It's not glue. It's not glue because it can swivel, right? It's also not a tight fit because it's very loose. So there's something that's different. So the evidence I will look for, maybe by holding it to the sun or to the light, as all things ought to be, hold it to the light, will help you. So if I look there, I see what looks like a pin, a dowel. And if I look this way, there's another dowel. So the dowel appears to be going through this piece of wood and sits in this. And exactly the same this way. Okay?
Not bad.
So what I don't know is how long the dial is, or how long the hole is that the dial is in. So let's test that by doing this. Am I getting hot here, Professor Ben?
You've got all the right constructs there.
Okay, so I know what I must solve. I must make the dial to move.
That's the correct principle.
Okay. So the dial definitely can only move that way or this way. Can't move any other way, right? So if it doesn't move that way, and it doesn't move this way, then it's more than one dial.
That's also true. You're so hot now.
And I've confirmed that there's more than one dial.
Yes. And sometimes you must think outside the box.
We use violence. The soft tapping method.
So the reason